projects, live through the bear market. And so there's a wealth of information that's hidden, which I'm hoping to get out here and talk more, I say high level rather than what is immediately in front of us for the next couple of months. I'm sure there's a lot of exciting stuff that you guys want to share on this webinar. So this is almost like a founder fireside chat. If there was a fire here, we would have had, in fact, I think there's like YouTube videos with 10 hours of just like fireplace videos, right? Maybe we should run that at some point. But let's get started. Let's do a quick intro. Let's start with Arjun. How'd you get into space? Why you continue to build through the bear market? So I've known you for many, many years now. So what is that conviction? Where did that come from? And what are you looking forward to outside of Connext in the broader space? Let's start with you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Ganesh. I've been in this space for a while. I joined Ethereum in 2016, and then I was kind of like tangentially interested in the peer-to-peer movement before that. I was kind of missed the Bitcoin train because I was very, very uninterested in finance, but I was very deeply involved in like old IRC communities and things like that. I became interested in the space because at the time I was really I was interested in two very high-level topics that were extremely abstract. The first was, how can we build public goods that are non-sovereign and non-corporate? How can we create mechanisms for human beings to coordinate with each other, similar to the internet, that don't necessarily need to be implemented by some institution? And I've always kind of been against, the efficacy. Like I just sort of been very skeptical of the efficacy of large-scale institutions. And then tangentially to that, I was also really interested in, at the time I was working on an educational technology startup, and I was really, really interested in how we could make it possible for people to diversify income. So I think that right now, the vast majority of people in the world are like subject to like effectively wage labor, where you have a single job, you are tied to that job, and like you don't have the capacity, the ability to take the risk of like leaving that job to be able to do things that are more interesting, because most people are not in a position where they have enough savings to do something like that and take that kind of a risk. So I was really interested in the time to see if there was a way to like restructure the way that people work at a kind of large scale economic level to be more participatory, where they're just like contributing to many different kinds of ecosystems, jumping into like, a community and like earning a certain amount of money per month or whatever from that community. And then doing that in like 4 to 5 different ecosystems. And that way, like you kind of have like, diversification of your income streams, right? You can decide, oh, this one place is not great for me and it's really bad for my mental health or whatever, and you can leave and you can go do something else. You can scale down your commitment to these different places and then go and start something new. It's cool because, while this wasn't necessarily something that we were focused on as an org, we're starting to see it a lot now in the space. I mean, there's a lot of people that are just like full-time protocol contributors, especially in places like Southeast Asia and South America, where they're just people who are like working in 5 to 6 different communities and like earning from all those communities and making it work, and actually earning more doing that than they would have earned in a traditional job. So yeah, why did I continue working through the bear market? Insanity. I think a part of it is just like, I think it's just like a really, really strong belief that that we need better coordination vehicles. We need to solve these kinds of key problems associated with the way that the world works right now that are completely broken at the moment, and that there is no other option. And so for me, it was like, I don't think that decentralized networks are stoppable. I think that they are inevitable. They're really the Thanos of economic incentive models. And like, at a certain point, it's like these things will work. We will find the models for them to work, and they will not be able to be stopped by anybody. And so it's like it was this really, really strong conviction that like, fine, it may take decades to get to that point, but there is something intrinsically valuable about building this, and it will happen at some point, no matter what.
Amazing, thank you, Arjun. Pranay, on to you.
Cool. So yeah, I think ideologically my bent is very similar to both yours, Ganesh and Arjun, where for me, what is interesting about this space is just simply the paradigm shift that it offers. That's like an that's like a tropey thing to say, but like the reason I got in is because in a former life I worked at a refinery and was also a potato chip slicer professionally. And in 2013, the Snowden leaks happened, which was kind of my inflection point to get into technology. The Snowden leaks was like an earth-shattering moment for me because I realized that in a frontier that was still quite nascent, there was a risk of our human rights being kind of captured or susceptible to violation from state level actors and people that have way more power than we had assumed. And so growing up in Austin, Texas, which was a pretty hippie city, there were a lot of tinfoil hatters that would say things like, the government's watching you, man, like be careful about what you're sending on the internet. You'd always laugh because it's like, no, that's not happening. And then when the leaks happened, then it just confirmed what people who were suspicious had been saying. So for me, I needed to move away from the physical frontier into the digital one in order to play a role in shaping how do we protect these rights. I pivoted into tech. I became a software engineer, but yet again, I kind of fell into the dragnet of working at big companies. I worked at IBM, and then later I started putting dog faces on people at Snapchat, which is the like digital equivalent of slicing potato chips. So yet again, I had fallen into this rabbit hole of doing something that was just like existentially generating ennui. After about 2 years at Snapchat, I just took a sabbatical and was like trying to figure out what do I do next. Around this time, a good friend and mentor was hosting a conference on crypto, and I helped him co-host it and got to meet a lot of the people that were speaking at the conference. And that's when I realized, okay, the craziest, most rebellious, and intellectually high horsepower people were in this field. That I had played with Bitcoin in 2013, but it wasn't until that event in 2018 that it clicked that this wasn't just like a digital coin that you can flip and trade for money. Because much like Arjun, like finance never interested me. I'm more of like a protocol / technical nerd. And so that's the moment when I realized, okay, there's cool stuff like Polkadot, New Cipher, and particularly like Mina, kind of Coda back then struck a chord with me because I'd never heard of snarks and zero knowledge proofs. But there I heard a talk from Izzy Meckler, who's one of the founders of Mina, talking about snarks and how this is a new primitive that could create digests for compute rather than just data as with hash functions. And so that got the ball turning. I reached out to them and started working full time at Mina like within a year. Like the next year I was there, and that was the beginning of my crypto journey. But in 2019 was like that was the trough of the bear market as well. But for me, I actually am one of the weird ones. I prefer the bear market in some ways because it felt a lot calmer. There was more signal. The signal to noise ratio was much higher. And I could just like put my head down and learn things without feeling the FOMO of, oh no, a bird NFT dropped and this guy I know on Twitter just made $500,000 by flipping the bird NFT. As much as I like don't pay attention to that stuff, it still finds a way to creep into your peripherals, and it distracts you from doing the thing that matters, which is how do we ensure that the substrate we're laying now for this new iteration of the internet remains fault tolerant and capture resistant. And so that's what keeps me going. And I almost in a way want things to cool down a bit so that more people will have to answer the hard questions and not just flip a hash for like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Amazing answers, the two of you. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes. But before that, I hope Pranay, you're a better slicer than I was. I was just slicing beets over the weekend, and I was like, these beets are extra juicy. What's going on? But it was actually I sliced my finger, so it was all blood all around. So I hope you were better than I was.
We'll do the next webinar. We'll do that. We'll talk about that.
Awesome. Okay, so now let's let's actually set a foundation for this webinar. I want to understand what is the connection between Nomad and Connext. Where does it sit in the stack? And can you talk to me from a layer 1 or a layer 2 side, and from a retail or end user side, because they're seeing different, they're exposed to different surface areas. So one of you guys, please talk to me like top down and bottom up on the stack on who's doing what, and where are the areas of responsibilities.
I think Arjun probably pass this one to you to maybe talk about the interop trilemma, because that sets the stage for kind of how the solutions emerge.
Yeah. So I think the core like idea behind where a lot of this comes from is just like understanding the trade-off space around bridges. And you know, there's unfortunately when you're building distributed systems, there are always trade-offs, and this is like the nature of working in this space is that like anytime you see anything anyone builds, you have to ask like what are you actually trading off to make this happen. And for different kinds of bridges, it's different things. So for instance, for multi-sig bridges, you're trading off trust. And like that, of course, happens at like varying levels, depending on whether it's like a, one of one multi-sig or a, N of M chain that is effectively like a POS chain that is also effectively multi-sig. But of course, like you get the benefits of having generalized like message passing. You can deploy this thing easily on any chain because multi-sigs are supported generally in every chain. Like you kind of like that's kind of like the end of the trade-off spectrum you end up taking. We found initially that there was kind of a trilemma that existed here between three core properties that you want that are desirable for bridges. The first obviously being trust minimization security. The second being what we call extensibility. So that means like being able to take this thing and then deploy it to many, many, many chains really quickly without having to change like the fundamental properties of it. And then the last being generalizability. So like what kind of data can you actually pass between chains? And like what kinds of things could you potentially build with it? The earlier version of Connext, for instance, was running using a mechanism that was similar to atomic swaps. And atomic swaps, give you very, very trust minimized communication between chains, and it can be easily deployed on every single chain, even non-Turing complete chains. But the downside is that they're not very generalized. So you can't really use them to like pass around very arbitrary data, only some specific kinds of data and some specific kinds of instances. And then, of course, lastly, you have things like IBC, very, very trust minimized, very generalized, but IBC only works in the Cosmos ecosystem. Trying to copy pasta that to other heterogeneous chains is very, very complicated because now you have to like deal with the consensus of every single chain. It takes a lot of work, and in many cases, it's just not viable because of its cost. Now, the thing that kind of like broke this whole like trilemma model and turned it into a more interesting design space was optimistic bridges that Nomad introduced. And that's actually where we started thinking like, okay, maybe there's some more interesting things that we could do here by trying to piece these things together. So optimistic bridges are a slightly different model where instead of taking one of those, you basically get all three of those desirable properties, but you trade off something else, which is in this case latency. In an optimistic bridge, you are optimistically relaying something across chains, and then similar to a rollup, you have a certain cooldown period within which someone can dispute the data that was relayed across chains. It's a simplification, and I think Pranay could probably get into it a little bit more. But yeah, actually, do you want to get into it a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I can get into it more. I figure we can do the deep dive technical bit later, but I actually this is kind of nice because Arjun brought up or talked about what Nomad innovates on. I want to talk about Connext, and I can kind of reciprocate that, where part of what helps with modularity or this idea of comparative advantage is that because everything is just trade-offs, one of the key things to understand is like there's an economic statement, I think, from Tom Sowell, Stanford Hoover Institution. There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Very famous economist said this applies to almost everything in life. And so if somebody's promising you the greatest bridge of all time, it is fast, it is cheap, it is secure, it works everywhere, they're probably not telling you the whole story. And so part of what Arjun just called out is that you have to be very intentional about what you're choosing to give up. And what Nomad says is we want to be able to deploy everywhere. We want to support arbitrary messages, and we want to be trust minimized. So this can be a foundational primitive for like a decentralized feature. But there is this minor trade-off of because we're optimistic, we have to wait a little bit more time to submit fraud proofs. But the downside is nobody using a bridge wants to say, nobody wants to be slower. Everybody wants it. Everybody wants everything and they want it now. And so where Connext comes in is Connext basically sits a little bit higher in the stack as another protocol on top of Nomad and says, hey, for certain use cases, we can be fast. For example, with fungible tokens, if Nomad generates those tokens in the token bridge application ahead of time, then the Connext routers and operators of the Connext network can take those tokens and provide that instant swapping ability. So instead of trying to do everything on one layer, we create this layered solution that in a composite manner gives you exactly what we want. And of course, there is a trade-off here as well, which is that Connext has to have the capital before they can provide, before the routers can provide instant swaps. So there is a slight introduction of capital inefficiency where that capital needs to be moved ahead of time. But the really great thing about Connext is they're the only liquidity network that has ruthlessly optimized for capital efficiency to minimize that to get as low as possible. And so in a world where capital is abundant, credit is easy, the thing worth sacrificing is the ability to move money ahead of time, and you retain all the other great properties that people are looking for in trustless bridges. But the thing that we have to focus on is educating people, and this is why webinars and panels like this are useful, because if people don't understand the trade-offs they're making, they won't necessarily understand how we arrived at this layered solution.
So something that's actually really interesting to point out here also is that it's a very positive sum relationship, because it's like the combination of putting Nomad and Connext together results in something that is better than any of these things individually, even if you just use them both individually at the same time. And that's because the way that Connext works currently is like we use like off-chain negotiation and things like that to like handle the relationship between a user and a router to like swap into funds on the receiving chain. We also have the user sign a message to like unlock their funds on the receiving chain. We need to do this because you need some mechanism for the user to prove that like this transaction happened correctly. So that way they can basically give an acknowledgement to the blockchain that like, okay, now you need to release funds to the router that like made this transaction happen. And the cool thing is by using Nomad, we actually don't need that to be an off-chain process at all. We can have that be an on-chain process that happens through Nomad. We no longer need signatures. We no longer need this like coordination mechanism. Now you can have this like open ecosystem where any router can come in our network can basically say, oh, there is a transaction that Alice made across chains, and it's in USDC from X chain to Y chain. I have USDC on Y chain, and I'm willing to accept. Like I have I have some sort of connection to X chain in the sense that I can read data coming off of X chain. And so I'm willing to take up the 30-minute Nomad lockup to front the capital to the user, and in return just take a very, very small fee. Now, the other part that's really cool about that is that like, we always talk about this from the perspective of liquidity, because it's sort of like the quintessential use case that people think about. It's like, how do I get funds from here to here? But my perspective, and I think Nomad's perspective on this is similar, is that like liquidity bridges and sending liquidity across chains is going to be like, eventually is going to be like the least inspirational use case of cross-chain communication. And the goal is to head towards like purely chain agnostic development, right? In the same way that you build like JavaScript applications today that are asynchronous and pull from resources that are all over the web, you would want to be able to build applications on top of blockchains that are pulling stake from one chain, liquidity from another chain, perhaps even posting data to like some other, more in-depth storage mechanism like Filecoin or Skynet, right? Like you can build these kinds of applications. You can have remote resources. It's super cool. And the way to do that is to like utilize this like you need some sort of generalized mechanism to do that. Now, the cool thing is that in the Nomad plus Connext case, this relationship actually extends to a large number of generalized use cases as well. So in many, many cases, you can actually still have, like, say, for instance, a user wants to, this is, again, very simple, contrived example. A user wants to like take assets that they have and swap them on Uniswap for other assets on a different chain. That can actually still happen through the short-circuited fast liquidity mechanism. And the reason for this is that effectively what you're doing is you're just paying somebody to go swap on Uniswap on your behalf and give you the output of those funds. And like what we found is like in any instance where the receiving chain contract is not permissioned, which basically means it is not checking the message sender, the origin of the transaction on the sending chain contract, you can make that happen in the under 2 minutes that it takes for Connext to like see a transaction and relay it. And that generally seems to be pretty much every user-facing case, which is kind of cool.
Amazing. Okay, so I'm just trying to go back to this trilemma. So can one of you guys just repeat what the trilemma is? So yes. It's trust, which is either custodial or NMM multisig kind of trust.
Yep.
What was the second one?
Generalizability. So can you pass any arbitrary data between chains? And generalizability, the point that hinges on is, can you make permissioned calls across chains? So can you have some way for a receiving chain contract to check the message sender of like this transaction, which is the sending chain contract? And then the last is extensibility. So can you take this system and easily deploy it to many different kinds of chains, many different environments with their own, security models, optimistic rollups, whatever, without having to really change the system significantly or spend tons of time doing that?
I'm smooth brain, so I'm going to repeat it in smooth brain for the other smooth brainers out there, which is, it's three things, which is, can you deploy everywhere? That's extensibility. Can you send any type of message and not just tokens? That's generalizability. And then can somebody censor you or rug you? That's the trust minimization. And of course, there's a lot of nuance to each of these, but we want all three of these things in any bridge out there.
Okay. But my follow-up question, the reason for asking that question is that there's two other parameters that have been introduced, which has now become the, I guess, from Trilemma to Quadlemma to a whatever five-pointed system is, which is latency and capital. Pentalemma. Yeah. So now it's the pentalemma. So you have latency and capital efficiency. Now, what is very interesting from a system design, from a first principle kind of thinking up to what the user cares about, is that there's generally in any of these kinds of systems an S-curve of utility to a particular user persona, right? An institutional kind of trader cares more about certain things, maybe not as much for is it deployed everywhere, right? Because they only have a handful of systems on their side, but they definitely care about trust, right? They care about custodial nature, because otherwise you'll be a money transmitter and things of that nature, right? So what do you guys like? So now the pentalemma is this modularity, which is including the latency and capital efficiency? Like, how does this get introduced there? Because clearly there are trade-offs being made with these two things to facilitate some of the other things, because of the S-curve is not the same slope for all kinds of user personas. So where in the stack is it migrating from a set of primitives that you can build using to like optimizing for the S-curve that you want, your desired S-curve?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think the fundamental question you're asking is like, what is the sweet spot? If we have these 5 parameters that we can push out on to certain degrees, where should we land on each of them? It's like if you ever played FIFA, you have a player and they have like these 5 things and you get the little like pentagon that shows you how good each player is. Like maybe they have high endurance, but not good accuracy, or it's been a while since I played FIFA, so excuse me, all the FIFA heads out there. But really what we're trying to optimize for is, we do not know what people are going to build on infrastructure, right? If you are opinionated about the persona or about the application developer now, then you may just miss the mark entirely, because part of what we're trying to do as infra teams, I think all of us here, is we are trying to give people a set of tools with which they can dream of things bigger than you can. And for that, the thing that matters most in my mind is extensibility and generalizability, which is you want to go everywhere and you want to be able to send arbitrary messages. That's part of the reason why custodial bridges have taken root, because what people have wanted is these two things, and they're willing to say, well, if it allows us to move fast now, we'll not worry about the trust thing. We'll use a more centralized solution and like let the infra people figure that out later. But the problem with that approach is it misaligns incentives. If you start building on a stack that is extensible and generalizable, but can be rugged, or like even if you're assuming good faith has the risk of being rugged, then you get into situations like what happened with Ronin or Wormhole or Poly Network, where 9 figures of money is lost despite the best intentions of the team. Trust minimization and decentralization is not just to protect yourself from an adversary, it's to protect yourself from insecure systems. You want to make sure that the systems you're building on are resilient, which is why we don't want to give that thing up. We want to be able to allow people to dream and build whatever they want, and then push out something else at the margins that they may not care about as much. I don't know if I would quantify it as a pentalemma, but like part of what we're doing with Nomad and Connext as part of the stack is Nomad is a new design that says, hey, let's think about another parameter that we can slightly push on to be able to get as much of these three things as possible. And that thing ended up being speed. If we end up looking in the time dimension and waiting a little bit, we can get a little bit more trust while being easy to deploy and facilitating general messages. And the really beautiful thing is that by working with Connext, now we have a way in many of the use cases Arjun talked about to say, even though the base layer, that infrastructure, the like lowest layer in the stack has pushed on the time dimension, we can make up for it by playing with money or playing with permissioning. And so what we want to get to at the end of the day is have a developer not see the trade-off at all, but get everything they want and be assured that the infrastructure they're building on will not get rugged intentionally or unintentionally.
Got it. Amazing. Okay. My next question is abundance in this space. So just a personal history here. When we started Covalent many years ago, I thought there'll be maybe 10 chains. That's it. And that's where all of the economic activity and all of the data would be concentrated. But what's happening today is quite the opposite. What we are seeing is there's an abundance of block space. There's Avalanche and their subnets, and Polygon and Polygon edges, and all of these things that are coming out, and block space is going to be abundant. So a product like Covalent has a massive market which is accelerating. So I'm trying to understand from a bridge technology, how does the dimensionality scale? What is the vector? You always want to latch onto something that's abundant, right? Because there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of projects can be built. What is exciting about the abundance? What is that one thing that stands out to you with regards to your specific project? Love to hear from you guys.
Do you want to go first or should I?
Yeah, you go first.
I think yeah, I mean, I think we're really in an interesting market right now. When we started working on interop, I remember this was like mid 2020, and we started talking about like, okay, well, what happens if we head towards this like multi-chain / multi-rollup world? What does user experience look like? And everybody said, no, that's not going to happen. You're just going to have one layer 2 that wins, and there's going to be Ethereum, and then there's going to be the Ethereum layer 2. And I think that's changed largely because the space has grown a lot, and then also because bag holder bias and the marginal cost of like creating a new chain, and eventually this will actually be so like marginal cost of creating a new chain has been decreasing, and then pretty soon once we really get good at building rollups and we can make them cheap enough, the marginal cost of creating a rollup is actually going to be near zero because you don't even have to bootstrap a validator set or anything. And so I think you're going to see this like massive, like long tail exponential acceleration of the number of rollups in these ecosystems. Rollups or other kinds of subnet like structures in these ecosystems. For us, that's obviously awesome because it's a explosion in our market. But of course, there's like challenges too, right? We like this role. I personally like the rollup model for scaling better from like a bridge perspective because when you have many different chains, and these are long tail chains with like lower economic security properties, these are now actually vulnerabilities for every bridge, because now you can do things like spoof, basically 51% attack a chain that has almost no economic security, and then spoof the data from that chain back to Ethereum. So we as the bridge builders, as the people that are actually enabling this communication, have to watch for this, have to actually stop this from happening. And that becomes really complex. I mean, it's a difficult task, but it's also really particularly difficult in cases where, you might be connected to dozens of chains that can get 50% attacked very quickly by somebody who's just sitting in their house with like buying AWS, AWS instances. So I think that's one big challenge. I think the other big challenge is trying to understand like what does the market look like? So like, I talked earlier about like, it would be really wonderful to be able to move towards a world where you have users and developers building things or using products in a space where they're not having to think at all about what chain or rollup they're on. They're just utilizing a product, and that product is tapping into many different ecosystems all at once. But that transition is rough right now, right? Because like now we have a lot of named branded ecosystems that people are like, no, I want to be a part of this ecosystem. So how do we go from like, okay, you are a part of this, you are operating on Optimism right now, and you need to get to Avalanche. How do we go from that to like, oh, I'm just using a wallet and I don't really care where my funds are. I think there's a huge opportunity, obviously, for us, but we can't really like do everything. So I think there's a huge opportunity more broadly in the market for people to start thinking in these terms and say, okay, let's go build infrastructure, whether that's things at the data layer, whether that's like interfaces, whether that's, wallets, whether that's, even just developer tooling. Let's go build infrastructure that like lets people interact with all chains all at once, interact with the interchain rather than necessarily a specific subnetwork.
Yeah, I want to riff on that a little bit because I think that is a very clutch point, which is that because how the market structure has evolved, it started out with like one world computer, Ethereum, and then after that, a set of ETH killers, and then after that, rollups, and then the ETH killers became ETH enhancers. And it's largely led to the current state that you identified or observed, Ganesh, which is an abundance of block space, which points to what Arjun is getting at, which is block space is rapidly being commoditized, but the L1 and L2 providers have a disincentive from that happening because for everybody providing block space, their block space is very special and unique. But what we're trying to get to is a world where it's not, where it is a commodity that, okay, just like you can go buy like a bottled water, it would be kind of the same way. Like Dasani maybe sprinkles a little bit of like minerals in there, but it's the same as Aquafina or whatever. And no hate to the L1 builders. I think like definitely the folks who are building the base layers have an obligation and responsibility to make it secure. So I think having worked on two L1s before this, I very much respect the builders there at that level, but I do think the market forces are moving towards block space being a commodity. Now, the question is, if it is a commodity, what role do bridges play? And to Arjun's point, how do we get to a world where users don't have to care about what blockchain they're on? And I think it'll be two things. One is secure connective tissue. If the connective tissue keeps getting rugged, then it naturally prevents that from happening. And two, also draws the ire of regulators and bigger forces out there that would maybe curtail the space more than we would want. And the second thing is application developers that are able to deploy to the interchain, as Arjun is mentioning, where only once there is an experience for users that feels agnostic to the chain that it's deployed on, will more people start getting into that mental model. But that requires a great developer experience from the people building the connective tissue, which is a lot of what Connext and Nomad team are interested in building, which is we have historically focused on the security layer. Now we have seen the market kind of push towards solutions that are maybe moved quickly and shipped a good developer experience. How can we now complement that by having a great developer experience without asking people to implicitly sacrifice trust minimization or security? It's a heavy lift, but if we do, then the market is abundant, much like it is for Covalent.
Amazing. Okay. Awesome. And my next question is measuring success. So let me tell you how I'm thinking about this. So with Covalent, our North Star metric is the number of API calls, which means the number of developers who are succeeding with the API, the number of use cases, the number of amount of data that's available, and so on. So that's the only thing that we optimize for. And eventually, at some point, it'll be directly related to protocol revenue and protocol growth and metrics that matter to the financial markets. But initially, as a product traction, product market fit, you want to understand this one single metric you have in your company's lobby, but then you break it down into the use cases and what's sticky, what's not sticky, what is all kinds of things. So what is besides TVL? What is the one thing, because TVL is what everyone talks about, so let's not talk about TVL. What is the one thing that you guys are looking to understand if your Yeah, Pranay, it's the new technology. It's a new economic model. Its number only goes up. There's no downturns, no corrections, no deflation of bubbles. But what is the thing? How do you know that you're succeeding? How do you know that you're trending in the right direction? Or if your initiatives and your effort, I'm sure you guys are working super hard, right? Is if it you need some kind of like reality check every couple of months to go back and see if you're trending in the right direction. So how are you thinking about that?
Yeah. So I think this is the answer to this is going to be kind of similar to like how we think about metrics in blockchains, whereas like we've gone through a lot of different iterations on like what we consider to be the best metric for a blockchain. Because like we initially had things like, okay, well, XYZ amount of value on the chain on blockchains, and then there was like, okay, well, XYZ amount of volume that is being traded on this chain. And then that, of course, that doesn't encapsulate a lot of like financial applications. And so then people switched to like, okay, number of transactions. But then, of course, there were like all of these like shit chains that were just like, oh, we're doing 100 million times more transactions than Ethereum. So we're clearly a bigger ecosystem. And so people are like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. You can just like spam chains to do that. And I think at the moment, I mean, obviously, this is not the perfect metric, but at the moment, what a lot of people have settled on is like fee revenue, daily, weekly, recurring fee revenue garnered from a chain itself. I think for Connext, we are kind of we're literally on that trajectory. We have been on in the volume camp, and now we are, as we start getting towards this more generalized stuff, we're like, okay, well, that's not going to make sense anymore. We're going to go into the transactions camp, but then we're going to get into like, okay, well, people are just spamming the network with random crap. Let's move into like the fee revenue camp. So that's generally like how we're thinking about it for like the top level metric. The one thing that we do that's a little bit different also is that we also talk about like, we also have like sub metrics that contribute to that. So for instance, like our ecosystem, one of the metrics that we talk about a lot in our ecosystem is like number of projects that we are able to get building on top of Connext that raise the seed round. Because I think that that's actually much more interesting. Because it's like, yes, it's not live, volume and whatever, but like we're a developer facing organization. We have a growing developer community. We want to like help that developer community succeed. And the best way to help them succeed is to like, they've built a project, they're live on mainnet, and it's been useful enough. It's not just a POC, it's been useful enough. Somebody who's actually willing to give them money to take it forward. So yeah, that's been like, it's a little bit of a toss up, but that's kind of how we like think about metrics more generally.
Yeah, in a similar vein, ours have also kind of evolved, right? Like you made a joke about TVL, Ganesh, but it is true. Like when you first start out, you have to start with the big number metric that everybody can like measure themselves against you. I'm trying to say that in a polite way. But definitely like once you get into more nuance, you've noticed like a lot of teams that get the TVL then have to then think about, okay, now we have this TVL, what are we doing here, right? And historically there hasn't been a great answer, and you can go in different routes. You can go in towards capital efficiency, you can go towards like what are the new things that can be built, novelty. But really, like if I was to give you one straightforward answer, we see our goal as building critical infrastructure. Like in a way, it is a great responsibility to build solid plumbing. And much like I made a call out about the layer ones, the way Nomad succeeds is by being so reliable that teams like Connext and others can build on top of Nomad and never notice any issues. Like similar to how AWS has like 6 nines of uptime or whatever, ours is just whatever metric you want to use, it's just reliability. We want our infrastructure to be utilized, of course, but the number one thing we are focused on right now that is table stakes is we are just going to be there and be resilient and provide high availability and uptime for people to be able to build on.
Amazing. Okay. We're coming towards the end. So I'm going to ask the last hardball question. And this is probably one of the questions where even I'll give an answer. What are people completely missing about your particular aspect of the space? You listen to people talk and they're like, this is completely wrong, or you just are, you have a very contrarian view of something that is generally accepted as best practice or state of the art. What is something that you think is the case?
Do you want me to go first?
I suspect you'll have the spicier take, so yes.
um, okay, this is a spicy take. Okay, so the first part of the spicy take is that, like, I think a lot of people sort of think about like bridge security models, and they put like theoretical zero knowledge bridge at the top of this. And I think Pranay and I had like chatted about this earlier. He's brought this up on another call. I tweeted about it recently. Like, zero knowledge bridges just don't exist. They're like not a thing. You can't actually validate consensus. Like, you can validate consensus in zero knowledge in some cases, but you're not actually like replacing the root of trust, the actual verifier mechanism, with like a ZKP. It's not like an optimistic rollup where you can do that. When you're communicating between blockchains, that's not actually possible unless that one of the chains itself is its own verification mechanism is running zero knowledge. So the exception that Pranay had brought up correctly about this was like Mina protocol uses recursive snarks for how it like achieves consensus, or not consensus, but I guess how like you validate the chain itself, and so you can then just like run that proving mechanism on another chain, and that it becomes your bridge. So that's like part one of the spicy take. I think part two of the spicy take is that, like, yes, you can use zero knowledge proofs to like improve the aspects of other bridges, like IBC basically validity proof bridges like IBC, or like optimistic bridges like Nomad. However, I also actually think that validity proof based systems and IBC style bridges have a lot of trade-offs that people are not talking about. Like, we talked about them as like a holy grail, but I think that there are core issues associated with that model that I don't think enough people are thinking about. And I think that they're related to the problems associated with the fact that you can attack one of the two chains. And if you attack one of the two chains like that, ultimately the security of your natively verified like client relay doesn't really matter at all. You can still like spoof data through it and use that to attack the bridge. Whereas in an optimistic system, there are actually ways to get around that. You can utilize the latency of an optimistic system to like hedge against these kinds of attacks and detect 51% things and like disconnect the optimistic system. So I think like, my spicy take on this, contrarian take on this, is that like, I think optimistic bridges are heavily underrated right now. I think very few people have really looked into the model and really looked deeply into like the kind of failure modes of validity proof systems. And I think when they really look into them, they'll find, in the same way that we're kind of like starting to find, okay, well, actually there are gotchas with zero knowledge rollups as well that like don't exist with optimistic rollups. And some of those gotchas are actually like failure modes and trust considerations. I think in the same way that we're hitting that point now with ZK rollups, we will hit that point with optimistic bridges / validity proof bridges.
Yeah, mine is a corollary to what Arjun just shared, and maybe more targeted at developers, application developers, which is there is this kind of, in any frothy hypergrowth industry, there is this mentality of the best word I have for it is jugad, which is an Indian concept of just like, it's kind of like a hack, or like this idea of just like duct tape it, MacGyver it, keep the car going in the direction you need it to, which like is a great thing, right? Like, I love that mentality of use the resources you have to get the job done. But the problem can be when it is used for the concept of just do the thing now and don't worry about the long-term ramifications. And particularly with regards to security, we have seen the outcome of doing that already. There's like, in the past 6-7 months, there's $1.5 billion that has been exploited because of doing the thing because the need is there now. And a lot of developers think like, okay, I can just build on the insecure thing, go to market, capture an audience, ship a token, and boom, that's success. But you'll quickly find that after that, there is a long road to run after that. And if you've built on a Tower of Babel, you will be in a very precarious place. And you are betting against your own success when your foundation is rocky. And so the thing that I would put out there that I don't think people think about is anticipate not just what you're building for the next 6 months to a year, but for the 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 year time horizon. Bet on your success and build on a thing that is built to last. And that way, if and when you succeed, you will be succeeding on top of a framework that will allow you to generate even more growth and success. So I think that is something that is hard to always keep in mind, especially when there's so much FOMO. But that's part of why I like the bear market, because it forces people to slow down and say, okay, what are we all doing here when the money's not easy? And so that time is going to come. Like I don't know when, but it will come. And at that time, make the decisions so when the tide washes out, you're not left standing naked.
But as Arjun said, it's insanity to be building in a bear market. So I don't know when that time is going to come, but
no, I disagree. I think it's very sane. Like, I think building in a bear market is the best possible time to build. It's so much more
I would
fun.
agree.
It's like you get such clear market signals. It's so much less stressful. I think it's insanity. You are insane if you know, at least if you were around in 2018 and you just like still, despite everything that happened, all the scams that happened, everything that if you continue to be like, no, you know what, I truly believe that this technology is going to become the foundation of the internet and the foundation of basically the future of everything in the future. You had to be a little bit crazy. Like you did, because like 99% of the world's population was telling you that you're an idiot. And every single market signal was telling you that you were an idiot. I mean, in 2018, in 2019, the only project that actually had any traction was SpankChain. And that too was like almost no traction.
Amazing. Okay, so my spicy take is that there is going to be more traction in Web 2 migrating to Web 3 than native greenfield Web 3 projects building up traction. So, and this is from a market structure where you're moving from the early innovators and the early adopters to a early majority, if you look at Christensen's definition of market structures. And we are talking to more and more traditional Web2 companies. I recently spoke to a gaming startup with 100 million monthly active users. And the biggest game today has 20,000 daily active users. 20,000 and 100 million, orders of magnitude different. So I feel like Gen 1 products, crypto products will be adopted by Web2 companies. And that's where a lot of the traction will come in the short term. So that'll come before the existing Uniswap traders or existing, like DeFi users grow. That pie grows to match that scale. Time will tell if I'm right or wrong, but we are seeing early signs of that happening. Fantastic. Okay, so as we wrap up, if you have any special announcement, Arjun, I saw your announcement at I think it was like Eat Amsterdam. Congrats on that. But if you guys have any special announcement, this will be like blasted through our social channels. This is the time. The floor is yours.
We're both reluctant to shill. Okay, well, I'll shill. I'll take my turn shilling first, which is we are super excited because Nomad just launched as the default bridge on Evmos. Evmos is the EVM chain on Cosmos. So it's a Cosmos zone that has EVM compatibility. And we are very, very excited about this chain because one of our theses is that the chains that sit between sit at the intersection of important communities will do very well. And so this harkens back to what Arjun said, where like, even though Blockspace is commoditizing, each of these L1s has its own distinct culture, and that still, thrives. And so we made a huge bet on going on great chains like Moonbeam, Milkameda, and Evmos, because they all sit at the intersection of large communities. And Evmos in this example is at the intersection of Ethereum and Cosmos, which I think are two of the very value aligned around decentralization and kind of like sovereignty in a way. And so my shill here is to just go ape. Like if you're a bridge ape and you're a degen and you want to go farm in a very cool new environment, Nomad has laid the bridge there. And so if you want to migrate your USDC, WETH in a secure way over to Evmos and then get like basically yield farm to get Evmos incentives and all the new apps like Diffusion and Saddle and Midas that will be launching there. That's my call to action. And you can also obviously use the product. And we have a front end, as this Connext team, that integrates both Nomad and Connext. So I believe Connext team is or will be deploying on Evmos soon as well. And so you can try everything that we talked about, because like all this theory is fantastic, but there's actually cool products out there that you can use. So go give it a try and let us know, give us your feedback on Discord, Twitter, or wherever.
Awesome. Yeah, on our end, we, as Ganesh mentioned, we just announced a token. It's still, I mean, we're still working out some of the details around allocations and things like that. A lot of this has been, it's launching a token is extremely difficult, and then launching a token while you're also working on in a very, very fast-paced space that is growing really quickly, and when you're trying to release a new product is also even more difficult. So we've been figuring out a lot of this stuff in real time. That said, we have already kind of locked down snapshots for airdrops that would be going to people who have used Connext in the past, and then also in whatever capacity from whatever application, and then also people who have been basically existing routers of Connext. And then for other folks who want to start participating now, we wanted to we're sort of we recognize that there are limitations to airdrops, which is that over time, they have become more and more gameable as people have begun to realize more and more how they will work. And so one of the things that we wanted to experiment with was this idea of a contributor program, which was it's a community run program where we have people who have already been leaders in our community setting up basically different ways to start working with our ecosystem. And our goal is to take existing processes in our ecosystem, for instance, our router community, or we have something called a community leaders program where people are moderators and ambassadors of Connext. Take these institutions that have already been built and then completely spin them out. So as part of this program, anyone can kind of jump in, and I guess anyone outside of the US can jump in and participate, and then earn tokens to start basically being a leader in our community. We're trying to reward a pretty wide diversity of things. So if you want to get involved, just join our Discord. It's discord.gg/connext, and also check out our blog.connext.org, which has some details on that program. And yeah, the goal, like I said, the goal is we are pretty passionate about actual community ownership, pretty passionate about genuinely having this be a decentralized ecosystem where it's operated by the community, where this kind of comes from my own sense of I don't think I want to be the conduit of information between different community members, but that the idea is make these things completely owned by individual groups of people that are completely separate from our core entity. Yeah.
Amazing. So just to add to both these points, Evmos, great project. I believe you're the default indexer on Evmos. It's undergoing QA. I think the mainnet just launched or relaunched yesterday or the day before. And so we've been working with Liam and the team there pretty closely. So expect more announcements on that side. For Arjun, the community program, the Alchemist program that we designed at Covalent is probably one of the highlights of my career, my entire career, right? And I've built cancer drugs that's in phase 2 trial. So this has touched thousands of people and across the globe. And even to this day, people come up to me and say, yeah, I was an alchemist here, and I learned a lot, and now I work full-time in Web3. I think 5 or 6 people at Covalent, our full-time staff, came from the Alchemist program, including people we've rejected because they were not qualified enough, right? So that's the best thing, the best kind of leverage, the best kind of impact you can have in a space, leveling up other people. So definitely there's that. So Luke, for example, who's going to be sharing all the traction numbers on Connext and Nomad very soon. He was an alchemist, right? And then the shill is, from my side, is shilling these 2 projects. So these 2 projects have some of the best swag, honestly, right? So I only wear Covalent swag, and I don't wear any other company. I live and breathe Covalent, but I only have 2 other T-shirts that is incredible stuff here. So Connext, if you get access to their swag, they have this really beautiful illustration. It was like purple or and it's in an octopus, something really crazy. So that is really, really cool. I have one of those T-shirts. And Nomad, it's a very subtle black on black kind of like labeling, but very cool looking t-shirt. So these are the two swag items that I love. So shilling these two projects. All right, folks. So I think we're up on time. Thank you so much. This is jam-packed. So what we're going to do from here is chop this up and have the traction, the metrics, the stats, all of the stuff that is ongoing. I think this is the start of a beautiful blossoming relationship. And thank you for sharing your knowledge. Very generous of you guys. Take care. Bye.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks. It was a pleasure.